Hello again, viewers. This is Eric O from South Main Auto. Got a new project today. It's a 1999 Honda Odyssey van with a 3.5. And this van has 277,000 miles on it, and the check engine light is on. So we're going to go ahead and hook up our scanner, pull the codes, see what they are, see if we can diagnose it. Plugged in the Verus, pulled the codes, and we have a 1491 for EGR valve lift insufficient. So let's go ahead and see what that is and see what we find out. So I'm over here by the engine now, and I've gone ahead and removed the top engine cover, just the plastic that goes on top of this intake manifold. I'm going to have a look at the EGR valve, some of its function, how it works, and how we can test it to determine whether or not we need a new one. So on this Odyssey, this is the EGR valve and the EGR valve connector right here on the driver's side front head. Alright, so before we get started, just a quick little snippet about an EGR valve. If you want to know a lot about it, do some research. I'm not going to get too in depth on the functionality of an EGR valve, but essentially it is what it says it is, I guess, so to speak. So the acronym, EGR is short for exhaust gas recirculation valve. And that's essentially what it does. It recirculates a small amount of exhaust gas back through the intake manifold, back through the combustion process. And the simplest way to think about it is, your engine doesn't have 100% complete burn. So it's going to take some of those hydrocarbons and unburnt fuel and essentially just run them back through the engine. It's a little more scientific than that as far as how it reduces cylinder temperature by introducing an inert gas, back into the mixture. But long story short, takes a little bit of exhaust fumes, puts them back in the intake, burns them up again. I guess we'll leave it at that. Now I've gone ahead and try this again. I've gone ahead and printed this out, a little wiring diagram here. So essentially, this EGR valve has a sensor on it. So it opens and closes, and the PCM controls that. The engine computer says, open now or close now or open this far, and it does that through a just a power and a ground. It has a full-time ground on the EGR valve, and then it sends a regulated amount of voltage to it that I assume probably runs on a duty cycle, and that's going to open the pintle of the EGR valve, allowing the exhaust gas to flow into the intake. So when it's doing that, the computer has to receive some kind of signal saying, hey, I'm open, or I'm not open, or I'm stuck. So what Honda has done, or the manufacturer of this EGR valve they've done, is put an EGR position sensor on top of the EGR valve, or a pintle position sensor. So as that pintle opens and closes, there's a potentiometer that that regulates and moves up and down, similar to that like you would find in a throttle position sensor. So it's just a standard 5-volt sensor. Has a range, I assume, from 0 to 5 volts or somewhere thereabouts. It probably has a normalized reading that is the closed reading, the voltage on what a good valve is when it's closed. I'd have to look, to be honest with you, see what that is, and we'll do that. But essentially what we're going to do with these tests is we're going to look to see what the scan tool sees, to see what that's reading, and then we're going to verify the inputs and the wires at the valve, and then we're going to have to open the valve somehow, probably jump some power to it to see if it's working. If it's coming open and closed, is the EGR sensor displaying the right data? Because theoretically, I believe the code definition was something along the lines of not receiving input or something. I have to look. Hang on. There. Sorry about that. So it says EGR valve lift insufficient. So what that says to me is that the valve's not going up and down, or if it is, the vehicle's not seeing it, or the PCM's not seeing it. So let's start with just some wire testing. We'll test whatever wires we can at the EGR valve, and then we'll go from there. We'll see how this goes. So again, I'm not much for a teacher, but I'll try to do my best. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is just go ahead and unplug the EGR valve. We'll get that unplugged, and we've got our multimeter here. We've got that just set up on our volts DC scale. I suppose the first thing we can check is to make sure that we are receiving our 5-volt signal. Like I say, this is a 5-volt potentiometer. Make sure that we're actually receiving the signal and receiving the 5-volt reference and ground from the PCM. All right, so I've got my test leads, I've got my voltmeter, I've got just a couple back probes here. We'll look on the wiring diagram here, and according to this, our 5-volt reference should be yellow with a blue stripe, and green with a black is going to be our ground. So it looks like this one here should be our 5-volt reference, and this should be our ground. Go ahead and plug those in, and we can see right here immediately on the scan tool that we do have a 5-volt signal. So that would signify to me that our 5-volt reference wire and our signal return, our signal negative wire, or our PCM ground is good. So that's one thing that we can check. Now the other thing we can check too is, like I say, according to the wiring diagram and what I've read a little bit here, the PCM controls the lift on this valve by supplying it a 12-volt reference. In turn, that opens the valve. So that makes this, has 12 volts in, and then it has a ground. Now this is a non-computerized ground. This ground goes right, according to the wire diagram, it goes to the top rear of the engine. So to check the integrity of that wire and put a little bit of a load on it, I'm just going to use an ordinary test light. I'm going to hook it to power, and then I'm going to test the ground circuit of the actual EGR valve, the EGR valve control circuit. So according to the wire diagram, it is the black wire. So it's this one here on the bottom left, and we can see that we have a good ground there. So I guess I'll just warn you, never use a test light on a computerized circuit. I'm not going to use this to test the ground side of the PCM for the sensor itself. So I guess one other thing that we could do here while we're right here at the plug is we can jump back into our scan tool, and we'll go back to the data stream that's on that. So let me get to the data stream, and what we're going to look at is actual EGR valve position. We're going to see what the computer is seeing right now, and which theoretically should be 0. So let me just go ahead and get some custom data here so we're not looking at a bunch of trash. Here we go, EGR valve voltage, and we'll look at this on a graph so it'll be a little bit easier for you to see. Let me just, hopefully you can. If I was fancy, I'd know how to bring this up on my computer and stuff so you guys could see it, but let me move some things around here so you can see what we're doing. Alright, well, I think that is slightly better. So at any rate, so what we're displaying here is, this is actually what the computer is seeing. It's our EGR valve position sensor. It's unplugged, so we would assume that really the feedback on that should be 0 volts, and that's what's indicated right here. So in order to test the integrity of this wire, what I'm going to do is, essentially, I'm going to take the 5-volt reference that we had here, which is our yellow wire, and I'm going to jump it to our signal return wire, which should display here on the scan tool as 5 volts, or whatever it was that it was displaying, minus a little bit of voltage drop that we're going to get through the wire. Okay, so here we go. So what I did is I just have a ordinary, this test lead here. I've taken and hooked my jumpers to my back probes here. So I'm going to back probe into the 5-volt reference wire, which was the yellow, and then the signal return wire that goes to the PCM is, let's see which one here it says it is the white wire with a black stripe. So in theory, if I jump this on there, we should receive a 5-volt signal. And we did. You can see it rapidly rose. Up here in the corner, we got a 4.98 volts, which is absolutely perfect. So what that tells me is we know we already had a good 5-volt signal here. This tells me that the signal return wire to the PCM is good. So the PCM, I can sit here and I can flick this thing in and out, and we can get ourselves a little jumpy signal. But at any rate, that tells me that the wiring going to the PCM is good. It has the ability to read the 5 volts. So we know that we have a ground. We know that we have a 5-volt reference. We know we have everything going to this EGR valve that it requires to run, except the 12-volt source, which the only way to test that would be is on a road test or a test drive. So I hope you kind of understood all of that. It's a pretty simple test, I guess, to do. Just kind of check, see, make sure what inputs we can test. Sometimes it's easier to eliminate what you know rather than what you don't know, because if you know that's good and this is good, well, that's not a problem. So I just hope that makes sense. The next thing we have to do is actually test the function of the valve. does it open. So the easiest way to do that is I'm just going to use, well, I'll probably use my my Power Probe to be honest with you, but essentially what we're going to do is I'm going to leave the sensor unplugged. I'm going to hook my power and ground to it through my Power Probe. I'm going to power it up, and you know, I'm going to do it with the engine running first, because we should hear the engine stumble and hopefully stall. Should fall right on its face if everything is good. If it doesn't, you know, we'll go from there. I'll come up with another solution, because the hardest thing is we can't plug this valve in and jump 12 volts to it and see if it you know, is going to rise on our scale. You might be able to, but I'm not going to feed 12 volts, you know, back through a computerized circuit. You know, I'm not going to take the time to tear the connector apart and all that. So yeah, I got some ideas. So let's get the Power Probe. Let's start the van up. Let's jumper it, see if this valve's even opening at all. Okay, so like I mentioned, I put a couple jump wires in the bottom of the EGR valve. Now that's where the computer is going to supply this EGR valve with 12 volts to open it. I've just ran those, you know, just so I can get them in there remotely. I've ran them up to my Power Probe. I'm going to start the vehicle. We're going to take and apply 12 volts to it and just see if this valve even acts like it's opening. All right, so with that hooked up, like I said, it's all hooked up to the EGR valve, so I'm going to supply it with some power. I don't know if you can hear it on the video or not, but that made the engine stumble severely, so I'll do it again. Yeah, it brings it right to a near stall. So that tells me the valve's opening, so let's go back and have a closer look at the actual sensor to see what the sensor's doing when the valve's opening. Okay, so this leads me to believe we might have a problem with the actual position sensor itself, because it's obvious to me that the EGR valve is opening, and you know, it seems that the passages are clear, or relatively clear, I guess. The engine almost stalls, so, and that's supplying it with a 12 volts. Now, that doesn't mean that the vehicle is actually supplying it 12 volts going down the road, so that is still one potential problem. So what we have to do now is we have to supply the valve 12 volts and monitor the sensor at the same time. Now this provides, well, I guess this is kind of difficult, because the only way really to do this and look at the sensor data is, you know, to have it plugged in. That'd be the easiest, because it runs on 5 volts. However, I have a Power Probe hook, and with the hook, one advantage of it is I can supply my own 5 volt reference. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've unhooked the EGR valve, and I've got a couple jump wires in there. I've got 3 jump wires in there. So with my Power Probe hook, I'm going to supply 5 volt reference to the reference, or to the 5 volt reference wire where it was from the factory. So it's going to be on the yellow wire. What does it say here? The yellow wire with the blue stripe. And then I'm going to supply to ground, and that is on the green wire with the black stripe. And then theoretically, we should be able to take our regular lab scope here, our multimeter, and see what our output is, which, if you remember right, was around 1.5 volts. So I'm going to get this all turned on and hooked up. We're going to check that. If that's good, I'm going to stick in 2 more jumper wires, open the valve, and see if the sensor's working. Here we are. I hope I'm not just rambling and just being confusing, but so I've got my Power Probe hooked up. I've got that putting out 5 volts. I've got that hooked to a jumper wire going to our 5 volt reference on the EGR. I've got the Power Probe ground hooked to the ground of the EGR valve, and I've got the 3rd wire hooked up here to the output. So if I go ahead and hook that to my lab scope, we can see it's putting out 1.5 volts on the voltmeter here. So if you remember right, I think that's right around where it was when it was in its, you know, resting position before. So I say I get 2 more jumper wires now. We'll jump it, you know, just right to the battery and let that pintle pop open and see if our voltage there increases. We've got everything hooked up. I've got our power, I've got our ground supplied to the EGR valve. I've got a power wire that's shoved in the bottom of it. I've got it up here on our lab scope. I'm trying to get this up so we can see this a little better. But right now I've got it on a 0 to 5 volt scale, so it is displaying a steady 1.5 volts. I'm gonna open the EGR valve and see what we see. Oops, that's me flicking across the battery there, but you can see that goes up to about 3.5 volts and then back down to 1.5. So, you know, watch on the lab scope there, I don't see any dropouts or glitches other than just me being jerky with it. So it appears that with the EGR valve opening and closing, I'm going to see if I can't get a spec from Honda to see what they expect at the low and high end of the spectrum here, and see if we can go from there. I went and did a little bit of poking. Doesn't look like Honda publishes this information as far as what kind of, you know, voltage output we should expect to see. Looking on the Snap-on scanner, they're claiming 1.2 to 3.7 volts. Essentially what we have, we got about, you know, 1.4 something to about 3.5. So I would say that's good. I don't think this is, you know, really cutting it down to the, you know, 1/10 of a volt, in my opinion. So I got to see what we want to do next. I just went and double checked the data and, you know, test procedures there put out by Honda. Really nothing more than what we did. We actually did, you know, about 2 or 3 more steps than what they'd actually do. There was only one other test where they actually checked the resistance of the, you know, potentiometer inside the, you know, EGR position sensor. They want to know if it's, you know, more than 100,000 ohms. I tested this one. It came up like 3.9, you know, or 3,970 ohms. So, you know, it's well within their parameters. So I guess the next thing that we can do is we can hook our scan tool to it and we can take it for a ride down the road, monitor the EGR valve data to see if the you know, PCM is actually controlling this EGR valve. And if it is, I've got to assume at this point it is just an intermittent problem, and you know, kind of go from there. We're out in the van, getting ready to take it on a test drive. I guess one thing I noticed that kind of leads me to believe that this is probably an intermittent problem is the fact that we had a permanent code for this here, that 1491 or whatever the number was there, but we didn't have any temporary codes. So I'm gonna get a hold of the customer. I don't know if this engine light's been coming, you know, on and off. You know, I'm gonna see if I can get a little bit more of the whole story, you know, to maybe help us. If it's an intermittent problem, you know, if we drive down the road and we watch our scan tool data and we see this thing, you know, opening and closing, you know, as we would expect, then, yeah, I don't know. Well, let's just go for a drive first and see what we see. I'm going to go ahead and clear the codes and get some data up here and see what we see. I didn't make it far from the shop, and up on my scan tool I've got displayed the EGR lift, I've got the EGR command, and then right here I'm watching the actual EGR voltage, the sense voltage. And I'm going to continue on this test drive, but I paused it because I got heading down the road here and it's pretty rough road right out of the get-go from the shop, and everything appeared to be working good, and I looked down before I had it in graphing mode and I could see my position sensor dropping right off to, you know, 0.14 volts. So here it is working good and steady at 1.3, hitting some bumps going down the road. All of a sudden this thing's dropping down, then it's up, and it's going good, and then it's down. So that's pretty interesting. I'm gonna take and see if I can hold the camera, let you watch the data stream, and drive at the same time and see if we can capture this again. Let me get up here and get out on the main road and see if we can figure this out. Look at that data stream there. You can see this is definitely dropping off the charts here. And I've got to try to figure out if this is attributed to rough roads or just an active valve opening and closing. So I'm going to get out here on the road where it's relatively smooth. We should notice our valve opening here. Yeah, definitely getting some dropouts there. I'll tell you what, let me pull over and I'll open up the EGR command also into a graph. That way we can see if it's, you know, being commanded to drop low. Get if it's a little bit of a comparison, but yeah, right there you can look at them glitches. It's commanded at 0 currently, and this thing's dropping right off the chart. So I tell you what, we'll go back to the shop, see if we can't duplicate this problem right in the shop, and you know, see if we can, you know, maybe tap on the EGR valve with a hammer handle. But yeah, that thing is dropping right off the chart here on the test drive, so that's pretty interesting. Okay, so I'm back here at the shop. I've got our EGR command down there at the bottom that goes from 0 to 100, and our voltage that we've been looking at here, and it's running steady here in the shop, 1.46 volts it looks like. I got it in drive, idling, and I just pulled in, and I'm going to give it just a little bit of gas here in drive to see if we can get this to open. You can see it's being commanded open there a little bit. But as soon as I let off the throttle there and that pintle slams back shut, that seems to be when we get our glitch. Now that it's warmed up here a little bit. So you can see our bottom line there, the valve is being commanded open. But look at our real live data up top. Man, look at that. Go ahead and pause that. So you can see the computer saying open, and the EGR valve is saying I'm opening but not steady. So let's just go ahead and probably the smartest thing to do would be verify our inputs, and make sure we got 5 volts going in, make sure we've got our ground, and then what I want to say, we'll stick another signal wire, or stick another wire in our signal side and see, well, if that's really what's coming out of it. I've done so far, I've got just 2 channels hooked up on a lab scope here. I've got one wire here, the red wire, I've got going to the EGR signal, and I've got the yellow wire going to the EGR 5 volts, and then I just hooked our ground wire to the actual battery ground. So this is going to test everything going into the EGR valve except for our ground. We've got that kind of independent right now, so let's go have a look at the lab scope. Alright, so here we are. Let me turn the key on here. Sorry about the glare on the video. I don't know how to do it any other way, so I can look into that. At any rate, the yellow line is our 5 volt reference. The red line is our, that's our EGR signal wire. So I've got these set up. The red line displaying here is on a 5 volt scale, the yellow's on a 10. At any rate, what we should see here is our yellow line should stay steady. That shouldn't deviate. Our signal line, we're looking for that to stay steady or drop out just like it was previously on the actual scan tool data. So let me get the vehicle fired up. I'll power brake it here just a little bit to get this to act up. That seems to be how we're doing it, and we'll see what it looks like. I've got it in gear right now, and I'm going to give it a little bit of throttle, see if we can't get the EGR valve to open. See there on the red trace that it did open. Let's try it again. Caught a glitch right there. Now it's really acting up. That dropped right off to 0. Now it's back online. Alright, let me just go ahead and stop this so you can play that back a little bit. Well, you can see it's spiking right down there. It seems like every time we let off the throttle, that would drop right back down. Yeah, it had a big one there. I think it's kind of hard to control. Yeah, so you can see right there, EGR valve's open, it's running like a steady 2 volts. We let it back to its baseline of 1.5, and then all of a sudden it just drops right off the chart. But what we learned from this is, see our 5 volt line here? That stays rock solid, never moves. Definitely not losing our 5 volts. So what we should do now, just to be 100% sure, completely confirm it, is we're gonna back probe into the ground side of the EGR valve with our ground wire and see if we get the same results. If we do, we can call it a day, tell them they need an EGR valve. Taken and hooked our black wire to the ground on the EGR. Probably should have done it first, but I kind of like to eliminate things here a little bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and start it up. You can see we have our 5 volt reference. We've got, looks like 1.4-ish some odd volts running out of the EGR, kind of what we'd expect to see. So I can tell you what it is actually. 1.43 volts and 5 volts, so that's good. Put this up on a bigger scale. So I'm gonna go ahead and power break it. If our 5 volt reference stays steady and our signal drops out, we know the valve is junk. There it is. Well, I think that confirms it for us. I mean, look at that. Our EGR valve is dropping right down to 0 volts. We're not losing power ground because our 5 volt reference wire stays perfectly steady. Well, I guess that's going to conclude this video, viewers. I don't have a new EGR valve to put on it. Could we have gone about testing this a different way? Well, absolutely. We could have started with our test drive first. We would have had to come back here and kind of confirm this. Either way, I just kind of wanted to make a video about testing an EGR valve, and to be quite honest with you, I suspected this EGR valve was going to be froze shut, so I thought, yeah, we'll jump it with the, with the power probe and stuff here, and I'll show you guys that the, the valve's stuck shut, or it opens but doesn't read. Well, I did a bunch of assuming, and well, here's where it got me. It almost, it kind of tricked me a little bit. So I think it was pretty neat. We could see here that independent testing in the shop, opened, closed it. We supplied it with 5 volts. It's perfect. I mean, it tests dead on the money. Even, sitting here running and opening, the engine's stumbling, and we're like, well, maybe this is an intermittent problem. Well, maybe it's not. It was a quick test on a test drive, watching our scan tool data. This thing's flopping all over the place. Pretty cool to see. And what was great is we were actually able to bring it back here and duplicate it. EGR valve works perfectly. EGR position sensor has taken a dump. I think it's a pretty cool diagnosis. Yeah, most guys, they get this code, they slap a valve on it, back it out the door, they're done. Well, would it have fixed it? Yeah, absolutely. Could it have been, a loss of our 5 volt reference or loss of ground? Oh yeah. I guess with that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. It's probably going to be a lengthy one by the time I get it edited, but hopefully you stuck through it and see that it's always my habit to just to diagnose something. Just go through, diagnose it the best you can, replace the part, and you got it. Yeah, you can guess, you can put a valve on it. I don't know, the valve's probably $100 and some. If I wasn't shooting a video, I might not even have an hour of labor into it. And still have done the same exact test. Grab the scope, hook it up, open, close it, all that stuff. So at any rate, I hope you learned something from it and enjoyed watching it. I know I got a little bit of some good feedback there on the tests we did on the Toyota air fuel ratio sensors, which was kind of similar. We did some testing. So I guess that's it. I wish I had a little better way to display my lab scope to you. Without all the glare and stuff. It's pretty bright in here. We've got a lot of lights. I like to be able to see what I'm doing. So maybe at a later date, somebody can share with me on how to do that and capture that. Yeah, anyhow, I'm going to stop talking. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. You, our viewers, are what makes this channel possible. I thank you for your donations that you give us. That is just allows us to just really proceed with this, filming and the time that it takes to do this. So Give this video a thumbs up if you like it, a thumbs down if you don't. Check us out on Facebook. We do appreciate the likes you give us there. And if this is your first time watching, thank you, and please feel free to subscribe. And remember, I'm just regular old Joe, so if I can do it, you can do it.